Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Migration Summit. It's an event organized by the MIT Refugee Action Hub, Manal, Karam Foundation, Paper Airplanes, and the MIT JWL. We are organizing a month-long global convening where we are seeking to build bridges between diverse community of learners, universities, companies, NGOs, social enterprises, researchers, and several other stakeholders to work towards the key challenges and opportunities for refugee and migrant communities around the world. This year, we're exploring the theme of education and workforce development in displacement throughout virtual events hosted by participating partners like this one. In this session, we're going to talk about how refugee founders of impact companies are succeeding against the odds and a call to transform the impact funding landscape. I'm glad to welcome our panel moderator, Amanda Levinson, co-founder and COO of NeedsList, a women-led organization tech company developing solutions for a new era of global crisis. NeedsList has created the world's first automated needs-to-resource matching software for humanitarian emergencies and natural disasters. NeedsList's solution have directed more than 25 million of resources to crisis-impacted communities in 25 countries around the world. So welcome, Amanda. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having this panel, for hosting this panel. Thanks to MIT. And welcome everybody. If people are up for it, why don't you do a short intro in the chat. You can just share your name and where you're calling in from, if you're a migrant, where you're from, what brings you to the panel or what you do, just any kind of information that you'd like to share with us. So I have some bad news and some good news about the panel today. The bad news is that Mersal from Chatterbox is unexpectedly on a plane and can't make it, and Yasmin from Roar for Good is sick. So unfortunately, they will not be here to share their perspectives. However, the good news is that we have a more intimate conversation planned with Manal Kahi from Offbeat and Dalton Sirmans from Amplio Ventures. And so we'll also try to keep this conversation to an hour as well. So just shorten it a little bit. So I'm really excited to be moderating this panel today with one of NeedsList investors and an incredible woman who I've known since the very beginning of our entrepreneurial journey at NeedsList. I actually think that in 2016, which is when we got started, maybe it was early 2017, I was in a pitch competition with Manal and she won. Do you remember that, Manal?
I was in Penn, right? Or Pennsylvania?
Yeah, I think it was, it was Philadelphia anyway, but you know, it was totally justified. Her business is incredible, as you will hear. So I'll introduce everybody in a moment, but I first wanted to give everybody just a quick set the context and give a bit of an overview of what we're going to be talking about today. So I'm sure, as everybody knows, we're living in an era of just astonishing displacement, global displacement. There's about 84 million people that are currently displaced worldwide, and that number is expected to quadruple in the coming decades due to climate change and conflict, poverty, and other issues as well. And however, I would say that we're also living in an era where we're creating a lot of new solutions, and there are a lot of really brilliant people that are creating solutions to problems, not just with displacement, but also to climate change, poverty, and other issues that are impacting the globe and impacting emplacement. And what's really interesting to watch is how the media and celebrity culture talk a lot about social impact more and more, and that companies big and small are really trying to do good in the world. And I think that a statistic that is pretty interesting is that in 90% of companies on the S&P 500 index published a corporate social responsibility report in 2019, and that was compared to just 20% in 2011. So that's a huge increase in a very short amount of time. And there's also been massive growth in the number of impact investors, so investors who are specifically dedicated to funding social impact companies. Impact investing is an estimated $715 billion market worldwide. And the number of startups and companies that are devoted to social impact, so creating solutions that are financially sustainable, but also provide a social return on the work that they're doing good in the world, is just exploding. It's a really exciting time. However, and this is what we're going to be talking about today, for all the hype, very little of that funding is actually being invested in, specifically in BIPOC and female founders, and refugee founders as well. So I'm sure that a lot of folks have probably heard the dreadful statistics about what percentage of VC funding goes to female founders. But does anybody know that off the top of their heads or have a guess? If you do, throw it into the chat, the percentage of venture capital that goes to female founders. And if you don't know, don't be shy, just make a guess. Anybody? 20%, 28%, 15%. I hate to tell y'all, but it's 2%. So only 2% of venture capital funding went to women in 2021. And only 0.032% went to Latina founders, and only 0.006% went to Black female founders. So we don't even have those are just companies in general. We don't even have the statistics on impact companies or women-led impact companies or refugee-led impact companies or BIPOC-led impact companies. So we know that number has got to be vanishingly small. So, and that's incredibly disappointing, because we know that the people who are closest to the problems are the ones that are best positioned to create successful solutions. And so Manal and the other panelists who couldn't be here today are some of the very few women with refugee backgrounds in the world who have received funding for their companies. And it hasn't been easy. And Dalton and his company they're one of the only companies that I'm aware of that actually invests in solutions directly pertaining to displacement and invest in refugee founders as well. So now I'm going to introduce the panelists really quickly. I did want to give a shout out to the folks who couldn't be here, so because they're incredible. Mursal Hedayat, who can't be here today, she's the founder and CEO of Chatterbox, which is an opportunity platform helping marginalized people, including refugees, access jobs in tech, starting with the online language learning industry. She's originally from Afghanistan and she lives in the UK. And I'll throw into the chat their information. Yasmin Mustafa, who also can't be here, she's sick. She's a social entrepreneur and the CEO of Roar for Good, which is a company. They're amazing. They've created a staff safety platform that protects hotel and mental health workers who are mainly immigrants and women of color to improve their well-being and increase job satisfaction. She came to the US as a refugee from Kuwait when she was a child, and she now lives in Philadelphia. And their information is here. And with us today, we're honored to have Manal Kahi. She's the co-founder and CEO of Offbeat, which is a refugee-driven food company that delivers authentic meals conceived and prepared by refugees who now call New York City home. So Manal moved to New York City to pursue a career in environmental affairs, but the hummus she found on supermarket shelves led her on a different journey. So she co-founded Offbeat to help New Yorkers discover authentic cuisines from around the world, all while creating quality jobs. Offbeat has since served over 250,000 meals in New York City. It's been featured in media outlets, including Forbes, The Guardian, the Huffington Post, Newsweek, Fast Company, and others. And she's currently a social entrepreneur in residence at Columbia University in New York. And I'm going to throw her information there. And we also have Dalton Sirmans, who's the co-founder and senior partner of Amplio Ventures. From refugee entrepreneurs to companies employing a large majority of their staff from the refugee workforce, Amplio Ventures seeks to focus on growth capital for businesses restoring refugee stability. Dalton has 20 years of experience as an entrepreneur and is invested in Amplio Ventures and their business investments. And prior to founding Amplio Ventures, he was the former CEO and founder of Main Street Technologies, MST, which was a leading independent provider of software solutions and advisory services to financial institutions, focused specifically on credit risk within a financial institution's loan portfolio. And MST was required by AKKR in March of 2018. And I'm going to put Amplio's and Dalton's information there. So again, thank you both for being here. So honored to have you here. And I would love to give you both an opportunity to speak for a few minutes about anything you want to share about your companies. And Manal, let's go ahead and start with you.
Yeah, thank you, Amanda. Thank you so much for inviting me today. You mentioned that time we met in Philadelphia. Honestly, I remember I was very impressed with the NeedsList, and I'm so glad that you're growing so quickly and you're where you are today. So I believe you've already introduced me. I'm going to say a little bit more about Eat Offbeat, kind of what we do, just to set the tone of who we are as a company. We launched Eat Offbeat back in 2015. Today, it's a food company that still delivers and serves authentic meals that are entirely conceived, prepared, and delivered by refugees resettled in the New York area. We have three goals as a company. The first is to create quality jobs for talented refugees who want to be in the food industry. The second is to build bridges between us cooking at our kitchen and our clients, our customers, having our food at home or at the office. The third goal for us, ultimately, it's really about changing the narrative around refugees, around immigration to a certain extent, by showcasing a different and a more positive story, right? It's a story where refugees are the chefs, they are the heroes, they are the ones helping New Yorkers discover something new and something different, go off the beaten path, rather than the opposite. We're not a charity, we're a for-profit company. We fully embrace that. Our chefs are employees, they're partners in some instances in the company, they're active contributors to the local economy, they pay their taxes, they're not here looking for charity or asking for people's money. It's just the opposite. They're here to help them, to add value to their city, to New York, to the economy, rather than the opposite. Obviously, I'm not saying we still acknowledge that refugees in many instances still require some level of help, at least so that they can resettle in a new country, so that they can start a new life. All I'm saying is we as a company, we as an entity are not necessarily filling that job. There are a bunch of different nonprofits who help with that. We come right after, once someone is already resettled, they are already in the US, they have their employment authorization documents, they are allowed to work. They're here to show that they do that, and they do that very, very efficiently, and they only add value rather than the opposite. Since we've started, we've hired so far about 50 or 55 different chefs. Obviously, I say chefs, but sometimes that might include delivery managers. It includes several different functions at a kitchen. Out of those, I can already name at least 4 or 5 chefs who have already gone on to start their own companies. Chef Nasreen, who was a chef with us for about 3 years, now has a very successful catering, events, meal delivery company. So basically she's doing that in New York. Rashana, same thing. She has her own catering company. She delivers to a lot of clients, again, in Queens and New York. Chef Bashir started an Afghani restaurant in Queens. Dia, who's from Syria, started a restaurant in Brooklyn. So I think I'm preaching to a choir that already knows all of these things, but everyone who's been part of our team, I've seen that firsthand, has already, they're here to work, they're here to contribute, they're here to do something, add value, and that's what we're really trying to highlight and, bring a community around, if you will. Is that enough of a context, Amanda? Would you like me to speak a bit more about kind of how we do it, or we can do that later on in the conversation? You're muted.
If you want to share a little bit more about how you do it, sure. That's great.
Perfect. I'll do a bit more of that, and then Dalton, the floor will be yours. We have a commercial kitchen in Queens, in Long Island City in Queens, actually, and that's where we operate. So it's a fully commercial, obviously, all the right permits, paperwork to operate there. That's where our chefs come in every day. Each has the creative freedom to kind of add their own menus. We really want to keep the recipes as authentic as possible. Obviously, we're also delivering to thousands of people every day. I think, Amanda, you may have mentioned a number of 250,000. That was a bit outdated, actually. I think by now we've served over 600 or 700,000 meals so far. So you see the scale. The bulk of what we do in terms of training with our chefs is taking someone from a home cooking skill, from a home cook level of skill set, really talented, because everyone we've hired has incredible talent that will blow your mind, right? They're excellent home cooks, but to transition from cooking for a family of 5, maybe sometimes for large dinners of 20, to cooking to 4,000, 5,000 people, there's really, it's a different level of operation. So that's really the bulk of the training that we do. So again, maybe to give you an idea of how we operate, we hire talented home cooks who happen to be refugees by status. We like to say they are chefs by nature or by calling. We have a partnership with the IRC, the International Rescue Committee. So people come to us basically as talented home cooks. In some very rare cases, we've had people who have come in with experience in the food industry, but about 70 to 80% of our chefs or our team members had never even been in a professional kitchen before, kind of like myself, actually. But they do have that incredible cooking talent, unlike myself, right? They're excellent home cooks. They really know what they are doing in a kitchen. And we really use that talent, not to say, we try to grow that talent and scale it so that they can serve, so that they can connect with thousands of people versus cooking for their families alone. We primarily started as a catering company in 2015, primarily doing corporate catering. 2020 with COVID, I'm sure everyone knows the story way too well. We lost 100% of our business practically overnight because obviously with COVID, there were no more events, no more catering, corporate catering happening. That still hasn't come back to a normal level. So we're still kind of in a transition period. But basically what we did in 2020, and that was kind of a decision by our chefs. There was a day where we all met at our kitchen and we thought, this is scary. Do we close? Do we all go home, take unemployment money, or do we keep going? And all of our chefs, no exception, they came to us in that meeting and they said, New York was here for us when we needed it most. Now it's time for us to be here for the city when the people need us most. They felt like they had a calling to cook for the city, right? How are people going to eat? Most of our chefs, they have this motherly instinct of, oh, but who's going to cook for everyone? They're going to be at home. We need to cook for people. And that's what happened, actually. We took our best sellers from catering, repackaged them, repurposed them, we put them in a box, and we started delivering those boxes directly to our customers at home instead of going to their offices. That's a program that still stands. It continued growing throughout 2021. Today we have a subscription program. It's a monthly service where every month you're discovering an entirely new menu. It's entirely curated, conceived by our chefs. The menu is fully prepared by our chefs too, and it's delivered on a monthly basis. We've also launched a provisions and gifts program. So basically those are dry goods that we ship nationwide. The meal boxes and the catering, we're only delivering in New York City. The provisions and gifts, those are dry goods, snacks, peanuts, all sorts of longer shelf life products that ship nationwide. So if anyone is interested, if you're not in New York City, you can definitely try one of our provisions. I think that's enough of a context. Obviously, happy to answer any other questions, Amanda, as the conversation goes, or if anyone has any questions, please feel free to send it in the chat. Very excited to hear more about Amplio Ventures from Dalton, and obviously we've had a few conversations too, so I'm excited that we're connecting again here.
Thanks, Manal. That's so inspiring. I love the story of your company, and people can actually order food, prepackaged food and snacks and things like that off of Eat Offbeat's website. And if you're in New York, you can actually order delivery as well. So I highly recommend that. Dalton, would you like to share?
I hate to follow that. There's such inspiration there. We could listen to Manal all day, and congratulations on your success. And Amanda, thank you for inviting me to be part of this panel. As you said, Amplio Ventures invest in businesses that provide stability for refugees. Now, these can be refugee employers, they can be refugee-founded businesses, or enterprises like NeedsList that provide supplies, goods, and services aimed at refugee stability. Ventures builds on the success of Amplio Recruiting, which was founded by my business partner, Chris Chancey, in Clarkston, Georgia in 2014. And the aim of that business was to find meaningful work for forcibly displaced people. Since 2014, I believe they've been responsible for placing about 8,000 former refugees, resettled refugees, into meaningful work across about 10 metro markets in the United States. But through that experience, as we were becoming exposed, my wife and I, to the refugee crisis, Chris began to encounter a number of refugees who were more inclined to start their own business. The only thing they lacked, like all of us usually, is capital. And so the idea of putting together an investment fund was born with another partner, Chase Carroll, who he and his wife live in Kigali, Rwanda. We launched this fund in 2020. And while the vehicles for investment may have changed, our particular emphasis and goals have not changed. We see that entrepreneurship and investing in refugee founders and refugee stabilizing businesses is a wonderful way for the forcibly displaced to regain not only their financial and economic stability, but also a sense of dignity that may have been impacted through the refugee experience. And yeah, that's kind of our story in a nutshell. I wish it was more exciting. Manal, I could listen to you all day. And I want to mention to everyone, if you're really hungry, do not go to Eat Offbeat's website. It will just ruin you.
Go and order. That's even better.
That's it. Go and order. That's what you do. Go order.
Thanks so much, Dalton. And like I said, I mean, so Amplio was one of the first investors in NeedsList and really took a risk early on in our company. And they're really one of the few organizations that's doing the type of work that's investing in solutions around refugees and refugee founders. And we're just so grateful to have had that support, but also to have your voice on as part of this discussion, Dalton. So thank you. I'm going to transition to some questions. I encourage folks to also put their questions in the chat as well. And I'd like to ask Manal a couple questions. First is, as a for-profit company, can you talk a little bit about your journey of getting investment and how challenging it was to raise investment, and also how much you feel like your background, either as a woman or a migrant or both, affected that journey?
Absolutely. Amanda, you're speaking in the past. I think it's more of it's still a present.
And present.
Yes. Was challenging, it still is. And I think it's probably going into the future too. So we can kind of use all tenses. Absolutely. I'll start with the last part. I mean, obviously, being a woman, being a migrant, being all of these, we're not going to go into all of these adjectives, but it definitely, statistically, it puts you at a disadvantage. I can tell you maybe a bit later about specific instances, but honestly, in most conversations I've had, especially, obviously it depends on kind of who you're talking to, but the more we advanced in our fundraising journey, the more we kind of knew who to go to and what type of investors to go to. In conversations with Amplio Ventures, I've never had a conversation with Dalton, but I've had a bunch of conversations with Chris. I was never cognizant of the fact that I am a woman or that I am an immigrant, right? So there are investors out there who, at least it feels like they're impartial to that fact. At the same time, there still are a bunch of investors where you actually go, one of my co-founders is a man. And I can count the number of times where I would be pitching, I would do the entire pitch, and then every single questions would be directed to my co-founder. Those are types of, it's kind of an indication on where people are in terms of kind of, hey, not even believing that I'm really the one behind the idea. I'm the one pitching, right? But then you're asking the questions to the man because you have more trust, especially when they're talking about numbers or financial planning, all of these things, even though I'm the one behind those things. So that's kind of some indication on where we stand. At the same time, it hasn't been easy at all. And in fact, we haven't been successful. Now we're talking, like, we've been mostly successful in large business competitions. We've gotten a lot of money from, we won a WeWork Creator Award. We've gotten about $360,000 from that. Those are in the early days. We've won a few business competitions at Columbia Business School. This is really how we secured the initial funding. And at the early stages of Offbeat in 2015, it was almost inconceivable for me to raise money. And every single investor I've talked to, they immediately were, oh, this is great. We'll send you to our CSR department. Maybe they can help you with advice or whatever. Never talking about money. The conversation immediately went elsewhere. There was almost no way. I'm someone who's never started a business. I've never been an entrepreneur in my life. Again, I'm a woman, I'm all of these things. So it was almost inconceivable. But business competitions were there to get us to a point where we could at least prove the concept. It's something, I had to, and I think it's common to a lot of founders, right? You have to prove that you are able to do something. You have to prove that there's something to the concept before you can actually talk about real money. Now, after that, we started going, and Amanda, please feel free to interrupt me whenever you want to guide the conversation in a specific direction, because I tend to, I'm going to go wherever I'm excited about. But so after that initial stage of really securing business competitions, at one point it became too much work, basically. I was like, okay, either we're applying to business competitions all day or I'm actually running and growing this business. So we stopped and we started really growing the business itself and focusing on revenue generating ideas, right? And focusing on growing our business through our revenue versus raising funds. Until, again, you hit a wall where you want to grow something, you want to go into a new line of business, and this is where you need funds again. At that stage, we started going more towards, we tried VCs, especially when we went into the direct-to-consumer market, traditional investors, and we were hitting walls with every single one of them. Everyone would be, oh, this is so cute. There's this nonprofit I want to invite you, I want to connect you with. Oh, that's such a great idea. How about my wife writes books about whatever, right? It was really this type of conversations I was having with people. I'm like, but that's not why I'm calling you, right? We're talking about actually raising investment. This is, you invest in food. This is an actual food business, right? We're as competitive, if not more, than other food businesses you have invested in. Why are you sending me to this nonprofit? Like, I want to talk with you. And by the way, same conversation we've had with clients in some instances, right? Where we go to sell them food and immediately they're like, oh, and right, they would have like catering programs, right? So I go there to pitch them our company so that we cater. And immediately like, oh, this is so cute. I'm going to introduce you to our CSR department. So this cute conversation is definitely something it's probably, I don't know if anyone else here has been facing that. Amanda, I don't know if that's something you've faced too, but immediately when we talk to investors, sometimes even clients to a certain extent, about a socially conscious, socially impactful business, they immediately put you in that bucket of nonprofit, in that bucket of not necessarily competitive or aggressive or well-marketed. And they forget to think about everything else that we are on top of being impactful. So I would say that's the biggest wall we've hit. Then we moved on to impact investors, just to go on with the journey. Our biggest problem with impact investors is that they were kind of as demanding as the others, which they should be. And then on top of that, you had to add impact metrics. So it kind of became sometimes even more challenging in some conversations. For impact investors, very often, they are measuring the number of people who are impacted. In our case, it depends on kind of what you're measuring. But in terms of creating jobs, we're not creating thousands and thousands of jobs. We're really about high quality jobs. That's jobs that 3-4 people in a family can kind of rely on to live comfortably. We start at living wages. We've never paid minimum wage, right? We start at living wage and above, there's growth. It's really about quality job, but it's not thousands of jobs, right? Even with our growth, in the very successful scenarios, there might be thousands of jobs, but at this stage, when we're talking the 5-year plan, we're talking about hundreds, potentially 1,000, but we're not talking about hundreds of thousands of individuals impacted. So very often that has put us in a category that's non-investable by some impact investors, because they are looking actually at impact in the ranges of hundreds of thousands of people impacted. And in our case, the larger impact is really on the people who are hearing our story and the overall impact of the narrative work, right? So that doesn't necessarily, it depends on, again, you need to find the impact investors that are interested in specifically that, and there's probably a handful. That's kind of where we're at. At the end of the day, maybe that's the most interesting for anyone else who's seeking investment for a social enterprise. We did find the most success, at least at this stage. I don't know, moving forward, things might change, but at this stage, we found the most success with individual investors, people who were personally invested in our cause, who personally liked our food, enjoyed it, and people who personally wanted to do something for New York, for refugees, for that community. That's where we've raised most of our money, let's say, so far. And sometimes institutions, we've gotten a lot of loans that have also helped. So we've had a good mix of revenue generating funds, individual investors, business competitions that have kind of gotten us where we are today. And obviously it goes on. So for us, I believe once we are able to prove a little bit more, especially in the direct to consumer market, if we can prove traction, if we can prove some more metrics, and this is really where our investors are trying to help us with, that's where maybe potentially we can reach VCs at some point, if that's something we are interested in. Because again, and I'd love to hear your take also, Dalton, but that might be something we may not necessarily want to pursue, because again, it puts you in a direction. There's pressure that comes with taking VC money that might be detrimental at the end of the day to our business, to our cause, to our core, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there's a couple things I could add to this. When I think about your story, it's not unlike most entrepreneurs, especially when we're talking about impact businesses. There are additional obstacles that you face, obviously, aside from being a migrant or an immigrant or a woman. There are obstacles when you're looking at who might be a potential funder or who might provide a particular grant. And it's very easy to go broad. And I think we have to start looking broad, and then we very quickly have to get from suspects down to true prospects and focus on what are the common threads that seem to match our particular mission and our vision. And then we can really hone in them. As we begin launching our businesses, and this was true more for Main Street Technologies than Amplio, it's like, well, I'll do anything to make a buck because we have to get an MVP and we have to prove ourselves as a viable entity. And that can actually work against you. But I mean, what are you to do? You're trying to get it up and running. You're trying to, keep the lights on. You're trying to make a small payroll and maybe have a little aside for yourself. But very quickly, you can have a little bit of drift in mission. So it's important to not let who you're seeking funding from or investment from force you to go outside of your guardrails, so you can stay on mission. And we've suffered that at Amplio Ventures as well, because we've chased larger organizations, funds, families, whatever. And it has, and if you were only this, or if you only slightly pivoted here, and I can tell you, it is maddening. Just like going through all these competitions where you're competing with several people for smaller amounts of money. I don't know if any of you have gotten to the point yet where you're asked to compete, but they also want you to apply with an application fee. So you pay $5,000 or $6,000 to compete to get some of that back, or maybe get none of it back. So I'm almost beginning to think, in some cases, this has become a racket, much like the children's beauty pageants they run around the country from time to time. So I don't necessarily think that's a very good way to gain funding, but it can be a good way to create PR and create interest. So I would look at it more like that. Although, Manal, you've had some success, and I know Amanda, you and Natasha have had some success with the competitions and raising some funds there, but it's a lot of work. normally for not a whole lot of money. Then we come to impact investors, and they certainly mean well. The problem that we see is that the impact metrics are not universal the way financial metrics are. And every organization, based on their mission, their focus, have a different way of measuring impact. And they want to make sure that you meet that. So it does get difficult. I think the key for all of this is, for a for-profit business, if we think about one key focus, you have to be a good business before you can be good at anything else. I think the key mistake that we see in some of the businesses is that they believe the mission is primary, which it is, but you can't sustain as a for-profit impact business if you're not running a good business. You want multiple bottom lines. You want to have, within your organization, you want to measure success by a number of methods. However, for investors and funders, you have to make that financial bottom line primary, at least initially, because if you can't reach profitability or positive cash flow, you can't continue to go as a company. And although a lot of impact investors will, and they mean this, they will tell you the impact is most important, when it gets down to a decision from the board, whoever the board may be, they're going to look at your financial metrics above all else. That's what matters most. It may be an ugly truth, but it is just the truth.
Yeah, thanks for that, Dalton. I think there's so much in this discussion already that resonates with me, and I know my co-founder Tasha is on this as well, so she's probably listening, nodding along. But so much of what you shared, Manal, and then Dalton as well, like really just that's been our experience for sure. Yeah, Tasha is nodding as founders, and there's something that Yasmin brought up that I thought I would share, a comment that she made, which goes to a little bit to about what you were talking about, Manal, but she wrote, as a B Corp company that provides safety solutions to protect at-risk workers, mainly women and immigrants, I'm sometimes bucked into the gender lens category, and investors will recommend that I talk to a female or BIPOC focused fund versus considering our company for themselves. And in return, when I follow their advice, the threshold for these focused funds are so high, I'm not a fit, and I feel like I'm caught in the middle. Manal, I wonder what your experience with that. We've certainly had that experience where, at the beginning, we're not raising funds now, but when we were raising funds, people would always say, and they also confuse us as a nonprofit, by the way, all the time, and assumed that we were a nonprofit because we were women-led and because we were working in the impact space. So, but a lot of investors would say, oh, this is such a great idea. Let me think of any gender lens focused investors that you all could talk to, rather than considering themselves as people who would invest in women. So I'm wondering if you've also, Manal, experienced that in your journey.
Absolutely. We're a food company. So initially we were really seeking out investors who have invested in food or in industries similar to where we are, right? Because those are the type of investors that would add the most value to us. Those are investors who understand our market, how we work, the conversation is usually easiest with them. But exact same thing, right? They would immediately go, oh yes, refugees, let's send you here, let's send you there. And usually sometimes when you go, obviously with impact investors, if there's not necessarily an interest in food itself, there's less value to add for us besides the money. The money, obviously, that in itself is kind of an incredible resource, but very often investors can also help you with the subject matter, right? They can help you with marketing, with expanding on the market because of the knowledge they've had from others in the same industry. So we haven't been able to actually get any investors who have invested in very similar companies to ours to be interested. It's been the exact same rhetoric of, oh, let me think of either funds that invest in women for me as a woman, or someone who invests in refugees and immigrants. And those are, I think Dalton would probably know the space better, but there's not so many, right? I may have already talked to all of them. They don't know food. I know basically Amplio Ventures, food is not necessarily the bread and butter, right? So it becomes a bit harder, and it's always, I think this is where the disconnect still lies. There's impact investors, but not necessarily food investors, and then there's food investors who don't consider themselves as impact investors, even though they've invested in similar companies, even though we can prove that we are as competitive, as aggressive as other food companies, if not more, because our story makes our marketing, it's easy. It's way easier than a company that has to invent a story and add it to whatever product they're selling, right? We have so much more to offer, but yet, like you said, immediately you're put in a bucket of, oh, nonprofit or something like that. And it becomes, I think, first impression. And I'm sure, Dalton, again, you can probably speak much more to that, but there is a first impression that lasts sometimes. And then you're on an uphill battle to convince this investor that we're not a nonprofit. And you end up spending 3-4 minutes talking about how you're not a nonprofit, you're a for-profit, instead of defending your financial model or whatever. You have a 10-minute conversation, you spend 3 minutes of that talking about the nonprofit for-profit. Like you've missed 25% basically of your chance. Is that answering your question, Amanda?
Yeah, and I actually, I mean, just to then ask kind of a Dalton, I'd love to hear your response to that, but also a follow-on question for you specifically is, so, with the Amplio Ventures being one of the few firms investing in refugee founders and companies that are creating solutions to support refugees, why do you think that is?
Well, you're fighting a lot of, I don't want to call it maybe tradition, you're fighting bias. First of all, this idea about assisting in the refugee and migrant space, forcibly displaced people especially, that the first idea that comes into people's minds that are not particularly familiar with that is this is a job for government agencies, NGOs, and charities. So they automatically believe that any business that would focus on this has to be a charitable organization. That's what they've been conditioned to believe. Now, if you want to add to that, this uptick in nationalism that we've seen that started before COVID, and then you go into COVID where all of the responses had to do with closing borders and keeping people at home, we've quite unintentionally exacerbated this idea of nationalism. So you have two huge barriers there that you have to overcome. And we can talk about it, but it's just been strengthened in the last few years. And then you put on top of that the other obstacles we've discussed. One of the problems we face with the Amplio is that, and there aren't other funds doing what we do, is that a lot of funds focus on particular business sectors and types of businesses and not people groups, not certain groups of people. So we've made the job harder for us as well. There's a lot to talk about. There's a lot of barriers you have to overcome. There's a lot of bias you have to explain away. And it makes let's call it the sales cycle much, much, much longer. The problem with a long sales cycle is that the longer it goes, there's more opportunity for the potential buyer or funder to drop out. So we're dealing basically with an immature market of potential investors and funders, very well-meaning, but they're still learning. They still need to kind of come up to speed as to what refugee founders and entrepreneurs are facing and why profitability and not nonprofit is, for many of them, the better way to go.
Yeah, thanks for that, Dalton. There's a question that came in the chat, which I don't know if if either of you know the answer to. I do not, but the focus is the question from Eileen is the focus is on the U.S., but I'm wondering what funding is available to refugees internationally, especially in refugee camps such as Kakuma and others. Do either of you or anybody who's on this who's on the call have ideas for that? I can't really think of many funders at all.
The problem. Go ahead. I'm sorry, Manal. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say I agree with you, Amanda. Because I haven't been in that space. I don't know the players.
What's unfortunate is 2 or 3 years ago, we probably could have rattled off a long list of names that were potentials, and now we have all the experience to know they're no longer potentials. It would appear on the surface like there may be funds for refugees that are living abroad or still in camps or still waiting to be resettled, but they're either so expansive and so large it's very hard to qualify for them. So I'm just not sure.
Yeah, especially on the investment side. I mean, the philanthropy side is different.
It is.
Yeah.
I can think of, I know Acumen invests a lot outside of US. There might be, I know they do a lot of impact investment, and obviously if it's the right fit in their portfolio, there might be work there. Eileen, I'm gonna write it here. Thank you.
Yeah, Acumen, that's right. Yeah. Another question, how about refugees living in camp like Ethiopia? We have many ideas, but sometimes since we are lack of networking with funding sectors, it gets buried in the meantime. Yeah, I would say that that's a huge challenge. And similarly, I can't think of many investors even providing, like, I think that one of the, one of my questions, Manal, is what would have made the biggest difference for you at the beginning of your journey? Because I think that one of the challenges that that underrepresented founders face, whether they're, founders of refugee background or migrants, whatever, is that there's not a lot of that seed funding that's available just to get something from the idea stage to even like a prototype stage. And then you're talking about the business competitions and, like that's a whole industry, as Dalton was referring to. But, what would have made that difference for you at the beginning of your journey back in 2015 when you first had this idea to really like accelerate that?
I think it's kind of a no-brainer answer of more money to hire the right people early on. In the very early days, I was doing everything myself. When a delivery person called in sick, I was the one who would go pick up the food from the kitchen, have it delivered. When a chef when our kitchen manager called in sick, I was the one going and buying tomatoes or whatever, whatever the team needed so that they had everything they needed in time. I was the one doing the books. I was the one, closing the book, doing accounting. I was doing basically everything, from being a delivery person or filling in for delivery people and up to doing my fundraising meetings or applying for business competitions or doing those business competitions. And I think at one point you basically burn out. You end up not doing your job, what you're supposed to do as the leader of the company. You end up not having enough time. You're dedicating maybe 20 to 25% of your time to doing that. And had I been able to do that fully early on, I probably would have been, that would have made things easier on a personal level, but probably it would have put the growth of the company at a much, much faster pace. And that would have required more money, basically. That's the reason why we couldn't have 2 delivery people, because, and I'm saying 1 or 2, obviously there may have been more, but basically a backup delivery person, because there's no cash, right? We had to be super careful and very, very efficient with payroll or with, I'm giving that just as an example. So yes, having more money so that we can hire the right team and really talented team early on, I think that pays off very well at the end, but it's a very costly investment in the very early days where you can only rely on competitions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Thanks for that, Manal. And Dalton, there's a question here that I think would be great for you to answer, which is about the criteria. What are the criteria that are taken into consideration when selecting refugee-led businesses for investment? I don't know if you can speak to that a bit.
Yeah, sure. And it depends on where the business is in its life cycle. If we're at early stage, we're normally looking for a business that already has a product or a service. They have some number of customers. Maybe they've secured some initial funding from family and friends, but they've basically gotten off the ground with that. And from there, while we're looking at the business model, we're also looking at the individual, and we're trying to determine if she has the support around her or him to push the business forward. We're often making investments in people. The expectation is that the initial idea or approach will pivot. It's going to go in a different direction based on the economic environment, based on the marketplace, based on what the entrepreneur learns along the way. But a good entrepreneur will be able to pivot and still be successful. And that comes with having, background, a good history, but also a good team around them. So, and of course, we're looking at, what are the financial plans? We're not looking for big financial impact, but our understanding is that profitability is tantamount to sustainability. You have to have a level of profitability in order to succeed. If you're a nonprofit, and there are many good ones, you're always in perpetual fundraising. And so for an entrepreneur, you're focusing on the business or the product and service, and for it to do a good job and bring in a profit, that means that it will be sustainable and it can scale and grow and employ more people. And that's the third thing we're looking for. Does this have an opportunity to employ additional forcibly displaced people?
Thanks, Dalton. So I'd like to keep this conversation to more or less an hour. I'd love to take more questions if folks have questions in the comments. And Manal, I'd love to hear from you. If you have any advice for founders, for people who are thinking about starting a business, or for founders of social impact companies who, might be from a similar background as you, like, what kind of advice would you like to share with them?
I'm trying to think based on what we've been talking about, and I apologize to anyone who's not necessarily in the US. I don't know how much of this translates outside of the US, but I would say don't be intimidated by the other. Someone mentioned they're all white men. Don't be intimidated by that. I do think there are already investors out there. There are people out there and there are conversations like the one we're having today. And I think there is a bit of a change coming up. So don't be afraid to knock on those doors. Don't be afraid to talk to those people. If anything, they'll give you, they might give you some advice you don't want to hear, but they will still give you advice that might be helpful when you actually do end up talking to the right investors, someone like Amplio Ventures, right? Then you have your financial documents ready because you've had a bunch of typical VCs kind of dig into that and make you really think it, so that by the time you reach the right type of investors, you're really ready and you can kind of defend your model. So I would just say don't be intimidated by that. It is true that it is the case, but it doesn't mean there are no investors that are right for you. Another thing I'm going to say, in that, to me, I think that's what helped us stay consistent. Really have that one thing you want to achieve personally and as a company, and stick to that. Dalton mentioned that being able to pivot, as long as you have your North Star, it's very easy to pivot. You can find a way to reach that depending on what the new context is around you. The market change, there's COVID, right? There's a new pandemic. As long as you know what exactly you want to do, it's easy to find other ways to do it and still exist as a business. And I think that is something that definitely translates well when you're talking to investors. So those are maybe my 2 points for now. I see Selen has been sharing a lot of great resources too for investments outside of the US. So thank you, Selen, for sending all these. And I apologize that we're keeping the conversation so US centric. Unfortunately, it's where we are today. I haven't been, I believe you too, Amanda, we haven't really been looking at what options there are outside.
Yeah, absolutely. And Refugee Investments, RIIN, is a great resource for folks that are looking for more information about funding possibilities, and also what other entrepreneurs are working maybe working in the space as well. Dalton, I'd love to hear from you if there are any, like, some of your reflections for either the broader impact investment community, or for social entrepreneurs who are thinking about starting companies. If there's any thoughts that you would like to share, advice or ideas.
Well, we need you. We need ideas. We need people that are interested in going into business with an idea of having an impact in a number of ways. But especially in our world, we're more interested, obviously, in working with refugees and stability for refugees. But there are many other ills that this world needs solving, and it's going to come from entrepreneurs. We very much believe that the business community will go hand in hand with government and nonprofits in serving some of the the ills this world faces. It's not easy. Entrepreneurship is not necessarily for everyone. And that's one of the negatives we come up against when we begin to pitch the idea of refugee entrepreneurs as a way to assist in helping with the refugee crisis. That, well, it's not a path for everyone to take. There's not a magic pill that's going to solve the forced displacement we see across the globe. So we have to go at this incrementally. We have to focus where we can have impact. And entrepreneurs have the ideas, and they can have impact. And you can take a food business like Manal's and have real impact in her community. And now it's broadening, it's expanding, and it's taken time. This idea was 2015, it's 2022. It takes tremendous patience to be successful as an entrepreneur, as a founder. Your good idea may look wonderful to you, but expressing that idea to customers and funders and people who provide grants, that's a tougher sell. If I could tell you one thing that we've noticed in all businesses, and this goes back to years of working as an entrepreneur, the least investment, entrepreneurs invest the least in good salespeople. You have to have someone selling your product, your service, and selling to funders. Now, your founder is the chief marketing officer, but you need someone on the front line that is always selling. To take David Mamet's line, always be selling. And you need to invest highly in quality salespeople. A good salesperson is not focused on the what, they're focused on the how. They learn about the product or service and they can pitch it. So that is something that I would recommend all entrepreneurs very quickly, once they get up and going, they look for that person who can sell in their sleep all the time, 24/7, lives to do it.
That is really true. Thanks, Dalton.
Sure.
Dalton's definitely been coaching us on that from the beginning. So it's really wise advice. Final question for Dalton, and then I think we'll wrap up. Do you work with refugee entrepreneurs in Africa?
So currently, Amplio Ventures does not. Our business partner, Chase Carroll, who's in Kigali, he has connections and he works in that part of Africa as a consultant and through other organizations. So if you want to drop me an email, I'll send that to him if that might be helpful.
Sure, Dalton, can you throw your contact info into the chat?
Yeah.
Well, thank you all. We're going to wrap up now. Thank you all for joining. Thank you for MIT for hosting this conversation. We could just probably go on and on about this stuff. So I really appreciate the conversation with Manal and Dalton, and to everybody for attending. So thank you all so much. And we'll see you at some other sessions. MIT folks, did you have any last?
Yeah, so thank you so much for this interesting discussion. I had a question, but maybe I'm going to take the liberty of being the host and say one last question. Quick, but it's quick. Are there any refugee businesses either supporting refugees or led by refugees that are hugely successful?
Hugely successful?
That are successful, that have, for example, over $1 million turnover.
One of the problems with identifying those businesses is we don't segment businesses that way. You have to really do some research to find out who they are. And up until recently, and of course, I don't fit into this category, but I know from speaking to people, they don't necessarily identify themselves very easily as former refugees. That was not like a badge of courage. And so Manal will probably know, but we would know incidentally. We just don't segment businesses that way. But off the top of my head, I just gone blank.
What about
this? Sorry, Lorraine, I'm not sure if that's answering your question directly. There's one business I can mention, that's Shobani.
Oh yeah, of course.
Has been...
Yeah. But what about companies? Because Shobani, okay, what about businesses that support refugees? Not that, not a business that sort of incidentally hires refugees as part of the talent pool, an organization whose whose core business is to support refugees?
So most of the businesses that Amplio Recruiting deals with are not supplying refugees, former refugees as employees, because that's who they solely hire. It's businesses that will take talented refugees onto their payrolls and try to work through the cultural and language barriers that are often the first obstacles. I can give you a current example. Accenture has made a commitment to hire from the forcibly displaced, and they've begun to add by the dozens. Okay, now, this is largely because of the emphasis on what's happened in Afghanistan and what's going on in Ukraine, but it doesn't matter. I mean, they have seen, and they also have an employment problem here in the United States, where I think in 2021, at the end of 2021, we had about 3.5 million more jobs than we had people in the workforce. Okay, it's a wonderful situation if we can connect the dots, if we can connect, you know, potential employees from the refugee space with the job openings. And we're beginning to see more and more of that, and building on the, you know, the fire that's been started and is in the media now.
Okay, so perhaps this is a challenge to funders like you, because the organizations like Laura wrote in the chat, like Concat, who support refugees but do a business. These are the ones. Why aren't they getting funding? So that's my challenge, because we're addressing the refugee crisis not by where Accenture. I mean, Accenture doesn't count. I'm sorry, they have billions. They don't need to. They don't count. What about an organization that is set up to support refugees? This is where these are the ones that need funding, not the Accentures of the world. Oh no, I agree with you. I'm with you. So a challenge to everyone there. How can we do that?
A good one.
Okay. So
Thank you.
I think Helen had a good answer. Let's make it Offbeat, NeedsList, and everyone else who is supposed to be on this call. You know, let's make that a good example to mention in 5-6 years.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yes. Okay. Thank you. Okay, so I will now let you graciously go after I ask my tough questions. Just a little aside, I don't know if anyone knows Zainab Badawi. She's my hero. And when I question, I want to be like Zainab Badawi. You have to Google her. She's amazing. Amazing. So that's where my questioning techniques come from. So thank you, everyone. This has been, even though I missed some of it, an amazing session. Nice to see you, Dalton, again, Amanda and Manal. Lovely to meet you. And we'll see you soon. Ramadan Kareem if you're celebrating, and almost Eid Mubarak. Bye, everyone.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.
Dalton, thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Good to see you. Take care.